introduce Dave Morris and Nadia White for the Wild Rockies Field Institute and also the University of Montana. They're going to be talking to us about work that they do educating the public about climate change. And specifically, they're going to talk about month-long bike tour that they lead to engage students with this idea of climate change and its impacts. So Dave is teaches field-based university courses. He is with the Wild Rockies Field Institute, but also, I believe, affiliated with the University of Montana. He's an ecologist. And then Nadia is an associate professor of journalism at the University of Montana as well. And they will give a tag team presentation today. So I will let you two take it away.
Thanks, John. I'm going to share my screen and we'll do a little self-introductions. There we go. So yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, Nadia, for facilitating this, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. This is something Dave and I love doing and are happy to talk about, and hope that we can offer you some takeaways, either if you want to consider taking your climate communications on the road, or otherwise kind of shaping public conversations in this realm. We were asked to talk on how educational adventures build understanding and engagement. And really, I think I should say thank you to all the NSIDC people who work to give us the materials that we teach and build our understanding of the climate impacts that we try to translate on our class and many other classes. So our plan here is we'll give you a little overview of ourselves, and then try to share some of the stories and the anecdotes from our time on the road with students teaching about energy and climate impacts, which is the focus of the two courses that we teach simultaneously over the course of a month. We'll go about 45 minutes and we will leave time for questions. If you have an urgent question, pop it into the chat. Misty is going to keep an eye on that for us, but otherwise we'll kind of do all the questions at the end of the session. I think I'll kick us off and then hand it over to Dave. As it says, I teach journalism and I head our master's program in environmental studies and natural resource journalism. I try pretty hard to keep climate impacts front and center of our story and our journalism work here in this graduate program. Sometimes that works better than others, but it gives me kind of a constant touch with the challenges of communicating climate change, even to students who self-identify as wanting to know more. It's still challenging. And I should just say that I worked at the Daily Camera. I was a Scripps Fellow at CU in 2005, a long time ago now, and I worked at the Daily Camera in the late 90s. So Boulder has changed, but it still has a place in my heart. Take it away, Dave.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Morris, and I come to this work from a long career in outdoor, environmental, and adventure education, which eventually led me to grad school here in Missoula in 1999. And I studied environmental studies and in the forestry department. And I took my my experience in outdoor adventure and field-based education to university students, and started working with the Wild Rockies Field Institute and a number of other programs that do similar work, teaching academic subjects out in the field. So I've been working with WRFI since about 2000, and in about 2007, another co-instructor, Nikki Fear, and I founded the Cycle the Rockies course. And so that's the focus of this presentation. But the things that we're talking about apply to this style of field-based education generally. So hopefully it's useful to you all. And we'll look forward to any questions you have about how to apply this to other programs that you might be involved with. All right.
It's not going to let me advance.
Oh.
There we go.
So just a little background on the Wild Rockies Field Institute. This is an organization that's an independent nonprofit. It's been around since about 1993 and has offered field-based academic courses for undergraduates for upper division credit through a variety of departments, environmental studies, forestry, philosophy, and Native American studies are among them. We get a number of students from Montana, but we also get quite a few students from other universities and colleges, and they can transfer their credits to those institutions. So our students are fairly diverse geographically. Let's see. The people who founded the Wild Rockies Field Institute saw a need to get students out into the field for lived visceral experiences of the issues that are affecting environment and communities in the West. And that led to our mission, which is to offer academically rigorous place-based field courses that develop engaged, informed citizens, and that they have an understanding of complex social and environmental issues that is more than sort of the cookie cutter stereotypes of those issues that we get in the news. So that's been our mission, and some of the practice we'll get into on the next slide here, if it'll let us go. Oh, there we go. So teaching in the field. This kind of education can be called experiential education. And we really want to emphasize that a serious root of all the knowledge we have is experience that people have had. And as we see often in our students, they don't always take what they see and feel and hear as serious knowledge, as something that should be considered as a valid way of knowing things. And so we really want to help the students value their own experience and to actually learn actively from it. And that's kind of the basis of everything we do. To supplement that and to sort of provide background for it, we do a lot of readings. We have long discussion-based classes nearly every day. We meet with a great variety of guest speakers who are living the issues that we are studying. They might be scientists, they might be elected officials, they might be working for an NGO, they might be tribal folks. And then we ask the students to write quite a bit. They keep an extensive daily journal of their experiences and their thoughts about what's happening to them and to our group as we travel. And then at the end of the course, we ask them to present their learning to a wider, more general community, because being able to communicate to people who maybe aren't like you and certainly don't have your experience is an important part of applying, what they've learned and sharing the great privilege they've had of doing a course like this. And one other sort of aspect that isn't on the screen right now, but I would say it's also about connecting students to people who might not ever, see college students, and to get to know them a bit, and for the students to sort of put a face on, ranchers and miners and conservative Republicans and, lots of people who they may not encounter much in their daily lives. And those connections can go forward and really help the students in terms of just opportunities in the future for jobs, internships, projects. So that's some of the way that we teach. Specifically for this course, our goals are that the students will become safe and resilient as bike tourers and as group members of our small band of bike-based explorers crossing the state. We want them to develop a really contextual, holistic understanding of climate and energy issues. And we hope that they will build informed positions on those complex issues, and that they'll be able to communicate them beyond the places where they normally go. So those are our goals for the course. And Nadia is going to go next into where we actually go, what we see.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great overview, Dave. So this is a map. We do not go coast to coast in Montana. We don't go from the borders to the borders. As the blue square shows, we're kind of strongly in the center west of the state, and our course is kind of ultimately northwest trending. I'll kind of just the overview. It's a 30-day bicycle trip, self-supported. We cover a little over 600 miles, and we camp along the way at sometimes at campgrounds, often at the homes of ranches or homes of people along the way who take us in and help us out. We start in our lower right-hand corner here in Billings. I'll kind of do the overview first, and then I'll return to Billings. So we had due north out of Billings until we enter into what's the Musselshell River Valley. We follow that for a number of days, stopping at small towns along the way. It's literally a whistle-stop town of the old Milwaukee Railroad, whose tracks were pulled up in the 70s, late 70s. So these towns don't have their reason to exist has kind of gone away, and that's a part of our story. We hit the halfway mark roughly in the capital of Helena, and we take a couple of days of layover days there before we turn north and go up the Rocky Mountain front. The Rocky Mountain front is kind of a very dramatic landscape that faces east into the Bob Marshall Wilderness and the Scapegoat Wilderness, before bending a little to the west and entering into the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. We pass through the reservation and stay in a couple of reservation towns, including East Glacier. And then we enter into Glacier National Park, pass on a good year, bike up and over Logan Pass, and end our trip in Whitefish. Each community has a little different story to inform our curriculum. And if you're noticing, Montana has pretty strong west to east winds, and so this route allows us to go from the plains to kind of the grand conclusion of the mountains, but it does have us riding into some significant winds for much of the trip, so it's very much about team building in that regard. Our curriculum really starts in Billings, which is a refinery town, and it allows us to either tour or just consider the impacts and infrastructure of refineries and the kind of the fossil fuel foundations of our economies right now and of the climate crisis. We look at oil refineries. We are over some of the largest coal reserves in the country, which becomes an issue when we get to Roundup. And we take time in Billings to consider the built infrastructure and how people can make choices about how they organize their communities for cars or for pedestrians, for energy efficient buildings, and for open spaces, and what impacts those have on a climate conversation. So that's the overview. I think I'll let Dave take it from there.
All right. So after a few days getting oriented and trained up a bit on how to pack a bike, how to ride a bike, how to ride a bike in a group on tight city streets, and then out on the open highways, we ride out of very busy Billings, which is the largest city in Montana, and we ride out into kind of the open range. And for many students, they've never experienced a landscape really like this. It can be hot, it can be dry, Nadia and some students were blown off their bikes by a dust devil on our first ride one year. And we go not super far, but by the time we get to Steve Charter's ranch, the students are pretty impressed with the landscape and are ready to stop and visit. And so we ride up their long driveway to the ranch, and we meet Steve and his dogs and maybe some of the apprentices who are working there. And we start to hear some of the story that they have made on this land. They homesteaded here in the 1900s. It was the Wild West. They actually held horses for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And they did kind of the classic hard work story of making a living off of the high northern plains ranching. And when you meet Steve Charter, it's pretty clear how hard the work is and how much of it he has done. And that work has, it ebbs and flows in the difficulty and the profitability and sustainability of it. But they notice it has just been getting harder as the impacts of climate change have started to become more evident. They have faced numerous droughts increasing in recent years. They have heat waves. They have had major infestations of grasshoppers that have wiped out most of the vegetation. They have weeds. And in their summer grazing grounds, they have forest fires that have affected them. So I have a standard story of how climate change has been affecting agricultural producers. The Charters have, since we first started meeting with them like 15 years ago, they always have an idea, an innovation, a project going. They had an oilseed press that they ordered from India so they can make their own biodiesel. They have been an early adopter of rotational grazing. Recently, they've started doing a major vermiculture operation with some apprentices where they're cultivating worms whose castings and other activity really help the soils. To deal with marketing issues and the monopoly of meat packers, they've been direct marketing their meat in farmers markets. And as I mentioned, they've been working with apprentices. Steve is now basically running the place himself. His sons and daughters are not really involved. And so he's relying to some degree on the energy and youth of apprentices, but also at the same time sharing, the accumulated knowledge that he has and the sort of innovative spirit for how to make a living in this place and sharing that with a new generation of agriculturists. But also right from the start, Charters have been facing down coal companies. His father, had people knock on his door trying to buy his land, telling him all the neighbors had sold out, and trying to basically cheat him into giving up his place. And that has just continued in various forms for a long time. What the Charters did was kind of similar to their approach to lots of things. They innovated and they organized, and they were some of the founding members of the Northern Plains Resource Council, which is a very prominent agricultural-based conservation organization in Montana. They also were early instigators of the Alternative Energy Resources Organization that focuses on energy issues, and they built their house as partially buried in the ground to be very efficient. So this is a very impactful first visit for students, and they really see, one, the face of someone really impacted by climate, the really hard work that is involved in really doing stewardship for the land, and also how powerful the collection collective action and organizing that they do can be, not just for them, but for the whole region. So then we move on. And the second part of this, the first part was ranching and coal country. This is mining and ranch country. So the mine that the charter's been fighting for generations actually did come to pass. In 2009, the Signal Peak coal mine actually got going. And it is an underground longwall mine that doesn't have obvious surface impacts as much as like an open pit strip mine, but they're basically pulling out layers of coal from underneath, and the land subsides behind it as they remove the coal, which has dramatic effects on the hydrology and in many ways that are complex and kind of hard to quantify in some cases. This mine's been going since 2009, and we've been going to visit it. So we ride out of Steve Charter's land and head up into the Bull Mountains, which again is kind of a hard ride for the students. And we arrive at the mine, and the scene is something like you see in the picture there. It's a pretty dramatic impact, especially right at the mine site. We go into the offices, and you see kind of the classic emphasis on safety that you see in all industrial facilities. And you also see where they're touting their community work and the projects they fund in the nearby town of Roundup. You see pictures of all the kids, of all the people who work at the mine. And you do get a sense that this is something that is supporting at least these workers and is having an impact on a nearby town. And we tour the site. And for many students, this is the first time they've really been to an industrial operation, certainly a coal mine. And we meet the workers who are there all day, every day, working long shifts. And the speed and the impact and the actual danger of the work is quite impressive to students and instructors. And it's really hard not to like these coal miners in a lot of ways. And so again, it's putting a face on people who you maybe just heard about. So it's making these issues real and seeing how important these jobs are for these workers can be a really important part of what students get from this. The fact that we've traveled there by bike really helps these connections. Steve is impressed that we always ride out to his ranch, and these miners have a hard time, thinking of making their morning commute by bike instead of by, F-150. So just to wrap up the first of our sort of three stories, one of the lessons that comes out of this is just the amazing complexity of the issues, ecologically, climatologically, culturally, in just so many ways. And the interconnections between these complex systems is one of the things that we really try to get across to students, and use a systems thinking approach to try to communicate that. So from there, we keep going, and we'll get to the next set of stories from Nadia.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So on the map, we've gone north and are now turning west along the Muscle Shell. It's the second week of the trip, and we bike into some of the most persistent winds in the country. We spent a week learning about fossil fuel energy production and impacts, and now we lean into learning about renewables. Biking into the wind gives us all a real visceral connection to the idea that wind equals energy, and evidence of people trying to harness that energy begin marking the horizon. Old windmills, defunct kind of first generation wind turbines, and state-of-the-art wind generation are all visible from the road and start becoming more numerous as we head west. Roughly 45% of Montana's energy is produced from renewables. Most of that is hydroelectric, which we get into when we turn further north. But wind accounts for about 13% of the state's energy production, and it's growing. Montana has the second largest wind potential next to Texas. This part of the state also offers a topography that introduces different energy potential. We've got plains punctuated by island mountain ranges and abrupt buttes. And this landscape gives us the potential for pumped hydro storage. So, and that's generation that relies on water, gravity, and arbitrage really to make energy work. So our big stop along the way is Judith Gap, which is the oldest utility scale wind farm in the state. And we meet with wind professionals there in their little bunker. It is truly, it is a site that's wedged in between two island mountain chains, and the wind is quite reliable for much of the year there. So they have a little bunker office, and they talk us through the way energy is produced and moved to the grid. It's kind of especially easy to see the moving of the energy onto the grid at that location. So it's been there for 15 years, and the tax returns on the project has really pumped money for local schools and infrastructure into what was one of the poorest counties in Montana, Wheatland County. People in nearby towns, it's a pretty conservative part of Montana, but they associate, they really appreciate the jobs and the economic boost that these wind farms have brought to their county. It's a fun bike ride, and the scale of the wind farms is impressive, and it's just nice to get close to the production. We move on to a one-bar town, and it's literally a town that has one bar. And we meet the developer of a proposed $1 billion pumped hydro storage facility. The project's not there yet, but it's all but ready to build on paper, and it's massive. It would put out 400 megawatts of production, and is fairly close to significant transmission lines. So building new transmission is pretty limited on that project. So the developer's frustration with the slow pace of permitting this ready to go project is just palpable. And this lends itself to broader conversations with the students about the role of regulators in energy production and siting, in transmission siting, and in consumer and environmental protections. And that's kind of introduces both sides of they often arrive with a pretty strong sense of environmental protection. And this complicates their imagination there. This seems like a good idea. Why is it so hard to get started on it? The next day we bike to White Sulphur Springs, which is a significant community. And here the complexity and our complicity in the climate crisis is really laid bare. We meet with officials from a proposed copper mine, the Black Butte copper mine, and they give us a soup to nuts overview of their plan. It's an underground copper mine that would tap into nearly 1 billion pounds of high-grade copper ore. The White Sulphur Springs community is divided about the proposed mine. Many residents are excited about the jobs it promises. Jerry, the head geologist, and the guy who's kind of been promoting this mine, grew up in White Sulphur Springs, and he swears that the mine will have ironclad environmental safeguards. He loves this place too, and that's a major kind of calling card for him. But the mine sits at above one of the state's most beloved wild rivers, the Smith River. It's the only river you need a permit to float in Montana. And fishing and raft guides lead the opposition to this mine, fearing acid mine drainage, regardless of Jerry's good intentions. The students are dialed into this talk about copper. We've been talking about copper simply since the beginning of the trip, when we kind of talk about how electricity is generated, and the idea that no matter what the source of the energy is, copper is an important metal for production, storage, transmission of electricity. Onshore wind generation uses about 8,000 pounds of copper per megawatt produced. So suddenly this supply of copper is expected to be a major challenge in any climate solution that includes a shift to electrifying everything. And the conversation becomes, is it our duty as Montanans sitting on top of a tremendous amount of copper to access that copper? Do we owe that to the world that's trying to create a climate solution? Jerry argues strongly that yes, this is the place that we should do that. And he and other Black Butte officials, they offer the students these snazzy looking ball caps with the company logo on them. And many take one. They're brightly colored, kind of fun. And later they wonder if they want to wear it at all. Just it becomes complicated. We end this portion of the trip in Helena with a visit to the Capitol. Helena's Capitol is beautiful. They redid it in the last 10 years for the centennial. It's a neoclassical building that just embodies the agency of Montanans to shape their own future. So we would like to think. And there we meet with a charismatic environmental attorney who details the risks that the Black Butte mine posed to the Smith River. He's emphatic about it. He's very articulate. He's well informed, and he puts a real fine point on the choices climate solutions are demanding. The world is going to need new copper. He agrees with that. This is the wrong place to mine it, he says. Not here, not above the Smith. It's 2 days of really battling charismatic ideas and compelling conflicting stories. So we take a day off in Helena and we stay in a hostel for a couple nights, actually, that's built for cyclists riding the Continental Divide Trail. Bikes are just kind of the great steeds of the plains and mountains there. It's a fun place to hang out and talk. And it's about this point in the trip that the emotional strain of constantly talking about climate, and we've kind of been talking about energy mostly up to this point. Now the conflict with climate change is really coming into focus. The emotional strain of that kind of climate education starts to show. The students are grappling with feelings of guilt and anxiety about the future. I think one of the big challenges of teaching climate change is managing the impulse to just run away from it. And I think it's one of the great benefits of field education in this is that the scenery is constantly changing. So even if you're not changing the conversation, you are changing the scenery, and it gives you a break from just kind of relentlessly grappling with climate issues. So we manage that. We do some talking about managing climate anxiety and feelings of guilt or fear. Someone has to decide whether it's okay to build a new copper mine, and like the climate crisis itself, this question of whether the mine goes in or not seems to fall to these students who have just come of age to vote, to pay taxes, to be heard, and all of a sudden these decisions seem really present. So we're about halfway through the ride here, about a little over 300 miles. Students are physically tired. The group is generally gelled. They've built trust and friendship, a vocabulary to struggle through the complexity of climate solutions out loud. And they're learning to kind of articulate the conversations, both in small groups with the people we're meeting along the way, and with the kind of their own writing. So we're really kind of emphasizing using their journals. Yeah, this class is definitely at its best when we sit and grapple with the urgency and the complexity of the systems that we're studying.
All right. And so the last of our sort of three stories is about the Blackfeet and Glacier National Park. But to get to the Blackfeet Reservation, we ride up the Rocky Mountain front, this very iconic Montana landscape, the meeting place of the mountains and the plains. And it's beautiful and it's challenging, it's hilly, it's windy. But the students are equal to the challenge by this point. They've become solid bike tours, and generally, most often, quite a solid group too. Along the way, we meet with a fascinating journalist, Hal Herring, who lives in Augusta, Montana. We meet with Mary Sexton, former director of natural resources for the state of Montana, and also worked for the Nature Conservancy. She lives in the small town of Shodo. And from there, we head up into much less populated parts of the front and onto the Blackfeet Reservation. We ride out this long gravel road, sometimes with some serious adventure biking, and get to the small town of Hart Butte, which is off the pavement. It's a small, isolated, very poor community, and just the legacies of the history of subjugation and genocide and just poverty are really apparent in this place. It is just really like going to another country for most of our students, but it's also apparent how strong this community is and how much they will work together to help each other out through their challenges. And we ride out of there and get to Highway 2 and the town of East Glacier, which is, it's on the reservation, but it's right on the border of Glacier National Park. So it's this fascinating interface of reservation life and tourists and a big old railroad hotel. And while we're there, we meet with Helen Ager, who works at the Blackfeet Community College. She's been a science educator there for 22 years. She created and directs a program called the Native Science Field Center, which does kind of a Worthy style approach to teaching science grounded in Blackfeet culture. And as befits this, she holds the sacred beaver bundle for the Blackfeet tribe with her husband Sheldon. And she is co-responsible, at least, for some really important ceremonies for the tribe. And when we first meet her, she introduces herself in Blackfeet. And the first thing she tells us is creation stories for the world and for this place in particular. And it is about destruction and rebirths and fires and floods, and also about the important role that people play in these stories in helping the world to go on through their livelihoods and through their ceremonies, and the ways they maintain this relationship of respect and reciprocity with the land. And in talking with Native American people, many places across the West, those words come up often. It's about relationship and respect and reciprocity, just broadly with the land, with each other. And one of the ways that they're doing that is she and her husband, who's an expert in managing buffalo, they are building their own small bison herd in concert with Blackfeet tribe and the E&E initiative that is trying to restore bison and bison culture and bison ecology to these landscapes. And there's now a treaty among tribes to advance this, and they are working together with a white run organization called the American Prairie Reserve to try to expand the area and to expand the restoration and the cultural and ecological benefits and resilience that bison would bring. So she's also been a part of the Blackfeet Climate Adaptation Plan, which they have developed over the last few years. And the Blackfeet brought in consultants, basically, from an NGO, the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, and academic scientists to help them build a climate adaptation plan that really fits with their culture and their life ways. That isn't something that's sort of, landing as a kind of an oppressive thing from outside, but something that they have really constructed themselves with help from outside experts. So Helen is an amazing person among many Blackfeet speakers who we've met with over the years. She and her husband Sheldon are some of the most impactful people that our students meet on the entire course. But eventually we got to leave. We got to move on. And we ride out of East Glacier, and usually it works that we can ride up over the Continental Divide at Logan Pass. And that sort of schism between, you know, what's sometimes called the fourth world community of a reservation to a very tourist-oriented, generally quite wealthy landscape of visitors to the park it's a strong contrast. But the park is amazingly beautiful, and it's been looming over the students as this challenge that they will face at some point to ride up over the Continental Divide, up this, you know, amazing pass through this incredible scenery. And they do it, and it's quite impressive. And they are, in this way, you know, we talked about systems thinking, they are crossing a real threshold and going to a different basin of attraction. They're going to the west side of the US. As you're going, I mean, we have talked about the history, the very troubled history between the Blackfeet and the national park, which has, you know, conflicts over treaties, had actual, like, almost armed conflicts at some points, and a lot of dissension and lawsuits and just trouble over the years. And at the same time, we're also thinking about climate impacts, and we ride through a lot of burned territory in this incredibly treasured landscape. This place has been strongly impacted clearly by climate already. Burned forests, and we also, you know, pass by lots of shrinking glaciers. We get down on the other side, we're near the end of the course, and we meet with Jeff Mao, who is a recently retired superintendent of Glacier National Park. And he had a long career at the park and in environmental education. He worked in Alaska, worked with a lot of the native communities there, became the Glacier superintendent. And he tells us, just right off the top, that building a relationship and developing cooperation with the Blackfeet is his greatest accomplishment as Glacier Park superintendent. And that has taken the form of cooperation on fire, on access for traditional uses, on transportation, and potentially with the restoration of bison to some parts of Glacier National Park. And overall, the stories that Jeff tells us sort of echo the stories that Helen told us about this very dynamic landscape that's sort of changing under their feet through climate change, but also through patterns of visitation and just the changing expectations and demands that people are putting on this place as it is dynamically becoming something other than what it was initially, you know, thought to be, and the park's mission was to keep it as that for in perpetuity. They're not able to do that, and managing a landscape like this in an era of climate change is quite a challenge. And Jeff talks about, you know, just seeing the wisdom in the Blackfeet stories and their knowledge of the landscape and traditional practices such as burning that are really useful. And building that a reciprocal relationship with the tribe has been one of his most important accomplishments. And for the students and for us as instructors, you know, just seeing these two groups, you know, the Park Service and the Blackfeet tribe, not brushing the history under the rug, so to speak, but just sort of getting past it and getting to building a relationship that can help everyone, deal with the dynamic changes that are coming in climate change is a really powerful story. And I think the students take away that kind of relationship is going to be essential to addressing all the challenges that we face, as a society, as a species, as a planet. So that's our last story here. And we just have a couple of things to mention just about the challenges, the difficulties, and some of the extra rewards of teaching in this mode.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's a great to revisit Helen and Jeff there. Yeah, I think no conversation about field teaching, it can go without kind of mentioning what it takes to pull off a good field education, experiential learning course. And for me, the intensive planning and logistics that have to be done before you leave, really even before you put out a call for applicants, I can't underemphasize that. Coupled with that is general based support, which often helps with that logistics and planning. But then when you're on the road, they're a safety net back at home, able to help with just innumerable kind of managing the things that are unpredictable along the way. Emergency of a variety of different types, or just when your plans unravel, or when new opportunities present themselves, you need base support to be able to kind of smooth out those changes along the way. I think Dave did rewards.
Yeah, and I would just say that this kind of education, I think it's not something that can replace necessarily traditional on-campus style teaching, but I think it's an amazing complement to it, and really provides like the emotional and visceral side of things that really helps students connect with issues that are otherwise kind of vast and vaporous and kind of unapproachable. This makes it real and something you can sort of get your hands on and maybe really engage with. When we go out on a course, we do not know exactly what's going to happen, and so we are learning right alongside the students. And so it definitely rewards the flexibility and adapting to what happens and what issues are popping up as most interesting and important, and that new guest speaker you met, in the grocery store, and just being willing to like innovate along the way and just have some fun. I think that's also a really important part of approaching these issues, that it's fun, you're together as a group, and the experience of being with this small band of explorers is really impactful for the students. The social aspects are really important, and the courses just would not be the same at all without that group experience. And I think that's about it. We're running a little short on time, but we'd love to.
We're doing pretty well. Yeah, I think we can throw it open for questions from you all. We have a question slide, I'm sure. The grand finale. Does it, I think Nadia, can you moderate questions for us?
Sure. I don't see any yet.
Yeah, so Dave, Nadia, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. And I'll start us off with, I have a bunch of questions brewing in my head, but I guess the first one I want to ask is about how, and maybe I missed it, how big of a group is it? And then what are the students' backgrounds, both in terms as cyclists, but also their educational backgrounds?
So our groups are capped at 10 students.
Okay.
So that's how many we can have, and sometimes we have fewer.
Mm-hmm.
There are not necessarily prerequisites for our courses. So students arrive with a variety of backgrounds, and we sort of key the curriculum to a level where anyone who tries hard and has, basic academic skills can do it. But the students really play an important role in what gets covered. We're a small enough group that we can sort of flex things to their interests as needed. As terms of cycling, they're again all over the board. We don't assume that they have any experience, but we do ask them to do at least a minimal amount of training ahead of the program if they're not strong cyclists to begin with.
Excellent. So the class isn't offered through University of Montana. It's separate. It's through Wild Rockies Field Institute. But do you know what class credit students get for this?
Yeah, why don't I grab that, Dave, because it does still have to go. They're 3 credit classes each. They're each upper division classes, and that means that they do have to be supported by a department on campus. So natural resources offers some of the credits. Environmental studies offers some of the credits. And that means it has to go through the normal faculty senate course approval process. So they have same University of Montana standards and syllabi, and all of everything applies to these courses that applies to the courses I teach.
Okay. Anyone else have questions? I see there was a question in the chat about getting through Glacier on bikes and timing for that and logistics.
Yeah, it's probably worth bringing that up, and I can toss it to Dave too. Glacier National Park, like every place else, outdoors has been experiencing a real boom. They've been changing the rules since COVID. And so if you plan on biking in Glacier, definitely check on the currency of your information. And some of those rules, which maybe are not so COVID related, is that to be safe, all bikes have to be off the west side roads by 10 a.m. And I have known other tour groups that have been pulled over and forced to sit in a pullout until 4:30 p.m. when you can rejoin the road. So it's not a bad place to be stuck on the side of the road, but it's not your plan. So we start super early there. And Bruce, totally worth it on a bike. There are some bike only seasons for going to the sun, and Dave probably might chime in about this year's electric bike experience.
Well, we just a lot of people are riding electric bikes up and down the Logan Pass Road. Yeah, this year we were lucky in that the road was still closed to cars when we came over, and so that was excellent. Yeah, but it's a fantastic cycling journey, and it is a kind of a fitting culmination of the trip for him.
I have another
I have a
question if
question.
no one else does. Okay, go ahead, Miss Dia.
I was wondering if you were to dream of another trip like this, have you thought about what other kinds of courses or trips you would do besides this one?
We're
if time wasn't an issue.
Yeah, constantly dreaming up new courses. I think a great one would be to study food issues from a bike touring course, maybe with a backpacking section also. So as we're riding around Montana, we now have kind of more regenerative ranchers than we can fit in our schedule who want to talk with us. And students are very interested. And so I think that, which obviously has climate and energy implications at the same time, would be a great course for us to offer as well, or someone else.
That sounds really interesting.
I had another question. So, you talked a lot about all these different perspectives that the students get to see. They're visiting ranchers and miners and, people on the reservations, and the topics are so emotionally charged. I'm guessing a lot of students that are taking the class come with a very sort of environmental background and bias. And I'm wondering if sort of do the conversations ever sort of get out of hand or inappropriate, or, do students struggle with sort of how to convey what they're thinking, but doing it in a respectful way, or the other way around? I could see problems with some of the conversations that are happening. So I'm wondering how you deal with that, or yeah.
I mean, I would say, I guess I'm not quite sure how it happens exactly, but the conversations we have are almost always respectful
Okay.
and sensitive. And one thing I tell students is, if you have an honest question, if you're genuinely wondering about something, you ask it in that spirit.
Right.
It's very hard for that to be heard as disrespectful.
Right.
Anyone. And one of the sort of pleasant surprises for me in doing this kind of teaching for a long time is how much people want to talk with college students. I can call up anyone, a super hardcore right-wing Republican, elected official, and he'll want to talk to our group, and so will the solar panel installer and the artist, and so it's a great access, and I just sort of selfishly love the access that I can have to talk to people who might be hard to sort of get through the door with otherwise.
And it makes sense that these people want to talk to the students, right? Because they're sort of the future. They're, going to be voting for, whoever's running, or, pushing for or against these different things that these people represent. And so that they see an opportunity to plant ideas in their heads that maybe the students haven't thought about, because, they haven't been exposed to, ranchers before or whatever. So that makes sense. What about out on the road? Do you ever have any problems with, I'm just thinking about, my experience riding in rural places, and sometimes you get, someone driving the big F-350, rolling coal and, buzzing you on the bike. Do you have those encounters, or yeah, maybe Montana's a better place than where I've
We didn't have anybody roll coal on us for the last 2 years.
Okay, nice.
I think that's true, but we share the road with some very large trucks and some not always thoughtful passers. And there's a real, Dave and I both tour solo at times, and there is although we're both keenly aware of our responsibility to protecting the students and setting up safe, helping their skills, setting up safe experiences, there is some benefit to being in a larger, highly visible group, that I think we benefit from that. So
Okay.
mostly, seldom are people obnoxious. Seldom are drivers obnoxious. In a group. I can't say the same for all of the roads I've ridden, but yeah.
Right. And, in all of this, we need to keep in mind that the vast majority of people that we encounter as cyclists are polite and respectful, right? It's a tiny number, but it makes a big impact on you mentally.
Yeah.
I know Dave, well, maybe I'll just toss it to Dave. We both experience that people are mostly curious about us.
Yeah, it opens lots of doors. And, when we're progressing, at like 30, 40 miles a day down these roads, I tell the students, like, you should wave at nearly everybody who goes, because you're going to see them, or they're going to see you at least. Most likely they'll see you again.
Right.
And in the grocery store, you're going to see people who saw you on the road, right? Make a positive impression for your own self-interest, but also just to just help cyclists be liked and respected on the roads.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I don't know if we have any other questions, but I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. It was great to hear about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and if anyone has follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me at the University of Montana or David Werfy. Pretty easy to find online, and I think we'll share the presentation. I think Dave was going to put some links into it, and then we'll send it to you, Ms. Jan.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care and get in touch if you like.
Yep. Thank you.
Will do.
Bye-bye.